Hey, Michael with XForcePC here to talk about the power supply and the overkill system and how it compares to a more conventional power supply. Now, first of all, you see here, these are just the retail boxes. This is the 700 watt that we use. We don't always use this exact one, but it's one of the ones we use in our platinum system and our titanium system. It's a bronze certified, 80% efficient power supply from a very good manufacturer, EVGA. So there's nothing wrong with it, but I want to talk about how this power supply sort of bests it. Now, obviously you can see just from the size of the retail box that there's more going on over here than over here. So let's get rid of those and let's talk about what's actually in the boxes. So the first thing I want to point out here between the two power supplies is the size of the power supply itself. This power supply being larger allows it to accommodate a larger fan. We've got a 135 millimeter fan, we got a 120 millimeter fan, and what that means is this can move more air at the same RPM, or in other words, needs to turn at a lower RPM to keep the power supply cool. And speaking of keeping it cool and heat, this is a 90% efficient power supply, whereas this is closer to 80%. And this is not a bad power supply. The bad power supplies are more like 70% efficient. Now what that means is, if this is, let's say, 80% efficient, you're losing 20% of your electricity to heat. Wasted electricity goes to heat. So the less efficient the power supply is, the more heat it's going to produce. It's going to put heat inside your case, and it's also going to make the power supply hotter, which is going to make the fans have to turn faster. So this being 90% efficient means the fan has to turn less, lower RPM, and in fact when it's under low load, this fan will actually turn completely off. I've had this running two GTX 1080s before and looked over and the fan wasn't even turning. Now maybe the fan turns on for a minute, cools things down, turns things back off, but both times I looked at it yesterday, the fan wasn't even spinning, and I touched the power supply and it really wasn't all that hot. So as things warm up, the fan speed will speed up, and both of these power supplies have variable speed fans. This one will come to a complete stop. This one will always be spinning, though the RPM will vary depending on the temperature. The other thing you'll notice here is you got all these wires coming out of this one, and there's no wires coming out of this one. So here are all the wires with this power supply, and these are the ones we actually will use, 3 of them, and then we have 4 here that we actually don't even use. Now, they're there for future expansion if you wanted to add a mechanical hard drive or a SATA SSD or maybe some fans or whatever. You could use these extra power supply connectors, but when we build the system, we only use these 3. And then all of these we just kind of organize and wrap them up and cable tie them inside the case, and we do a neat job of it. But on this one, it is what's known as a fully modular power supply. You can see this is where all the cords or cables will plug in, and obviously all we have here is a box. There are literally no cables plugged into it, and that's what makes it fully modular. Now it does come with this little bag, and it has all the cables in it that we would need, and we would just pull out the ones that we need. I think we need these 3, and then all of these, I can barely wrap my hand around, are the ones that are extra, that if you need them, you can plug them in here and maybe hook up another hard drive or fan or whatever. Now this one also has some advanced protection built in, and it has over voltage, under voltage, short circuit, overpower, over temperature protection built in. And that's not to say this doesn't have those features, but these are going to be, they're going to be more advanced on this one. And lastly, people get hung up on the fact, this is a 1,000 watt power supply. Well, that's not the whole story, because I can buy a 1,000 watt power supply cheaper, or as cheap as this 700 watt. Just to say it's a 1,000 watt power supply doesn't tell the whole story. They make very, very cheap 1,000 watt power supplies, and some competitors, I don't know who, would probably use those cheap 1,000 watt power supplies. This power supply cost about 2.5 times more than this one, to give you kind of a perspective on it. And I could buy 1,000 watt that costs as little as this or less than this. So get the full story if you're looking at a computer with 1,000 watt power supply. Find out what's the efficiency rating. Is it modular? Does it have all these over voltage, under voltage, and so forth protections? So anyway, there's the story on the power supplies, and especially the power supply in the Total Overkill system.